I sat in the boardroom watching Derek Sullivan present my work as his own. The diagrams on the screen were mine. Every flowchart, every algorithm notation, even the example datasets I'd used in my original documentation. My patent application from 2 years ago contained these exact designs, filed months before I'd even joined Cascade Technologies. Derek stood there confidently, pointing to my innovations like he'd spent sleepless nights creating them. When I raised my hand to clarify a technical point, he cut me off smoothly. "Let's save detailed questions for later," he said, smiling at the board members. They nodded, completely absorbed in his presentation. I felt my stomach twist as the CEO complimented his visionary approach. The board secretary typed notes into her laptop, officially recording Derek as the architect of the DataStream software. Nobody questioned him. Nobody looked my way for confirmation. The applause that followed felt like a physical blow. After the meeting, I cornered Derek in his office. My hands shook as I closed the door behind me. "That was my design," I said quietly. "You know it was." Derek leaned back in his chair, completely relaxed. "You're part of the team that built this, yes," he replied. "You should feel grateful to contribute to something this significant." I mentioned the patent, the documentation with my name clearly listed as the sole inventor. He waved his hand dismissively. "Patents don't mean much inside a company structure. What matters is who presents the vision to leadership." His tone shifted slightly colder. "I control your performance reviews, your project assignments, your future here. Remember that." The threat was clear. As I turned to leave, my phone buzzed. An email from HR. "Meeting requested today, 3 p.m. Derek smiled knowingly. I realized then that this wasn't accidental. He'd planned everything carefully. The HR director, Patricia Hayes, greeted me with a tight smile. "We need to discuss the boardroom incident," she began. "Incident?" As if I'd done something wrong. She explained that leadership had concerns about my emotional response during Derek's presentation. I tried explaining that he'd presented my patented work without attribution, but Patricia interrupted gently. "Sometimes in collaborative environments, ownership lines blur," she said. "What's important is team cohesion and supporting leadership alignment." She suggested I take a few days to reflect on professional boundaries. The message was clear. Challenging Derek meant challenging the company's chosen narrative. I asked if anyone had reviewed my patent documentation. Patricia's expression remained carefully neutral. "That's outside my scope. What I can tell you is that disrupting executive presentations raises questions about your judgment." I left her office understanding that the system had already chosen sides. It wasn't mine. The erasure happened gradually, then suddenly. First, my calendar invitations to key meetings disappeared without explanation. Junior developers I'd been mentoring were instructed to report directly to Derek. My access to certain project repositories was quietly restricted. During team stand-ups, Derek began referring to design decisions as his approach or his framework, never mentioning my contributions. Colleagues who used to consult me on technical challenges stopped reaching out. I watched my role shrink from lead architect to invisible bystander. Derek positioned himself brilliantly, answering technical questions just vaguely enough to sound authoritative while delegating actual problem-solving to others. Then I overheard him in the conference room, promising the board a delivery timeline for the next software phase. My chest tightened. Only I knew that timeline was impossible with our current resources. He was making commitments based on work he didn't understand. Late one evening, unable to sleep, I pulled out my patent documents. Filed 18 months before joining Cascade Technologies. Approved 6 months before Derek's presentation. My name appeared on every page. Sole inventor, primary applicant, exclusive rights holder. The technical specifications matched DataStream's core architecture exactly because Derek had literally copied my work. I'd been so focused on being a team player, on fitting into corporate culture, that I'd ignored the power of legal documentation. Reading through my own words, my innovations, my problem-solving approaches, something shifted inside me. This wasn't just professional theft. It was erasure of my identity, my contribution, my value. The next morning, an email arrived from Derek with the subject line, "Voluntary transition opportunity." My hands trembled as I opened it. He wanted me gone, but on his terms. The severance offer was generous financially but devastating legally. Buried in the standard language was a clause requiring me to acknowledge all work created during my employment as company property, regardless of prior patents. Another section demanded broad non-disparagement terms that would prevent me from discussing my patent or any ownership disputes publicly. Derek presented it as protecting everyone's interests. "This ensures a smooth transition for you and the team," he wrote. I showed the document to a lawyer friend that evening. She highlighted the intellectual property section immediately. "Signing this could compromise your patent rights," she explained. "They're trying to create legal ambiguity about ownership." I emailed Derek declining to sign anything affecting my patent. His response came within 2 hours. The offer was withdrawn. No explanation, no negotiation. Just gone. The message was clear: comply completely or face consequences. The whisper campaign started subtly. Colleagues mentioned hearing I was struggling with the collaborative environment. Someone told me Derek had expressed concerns about my resentment over team dynamics. During a department lunch I wasn't invited to, apparently there'd been discussion about my difficulty accepting feedback. None of this was confronted directly. Instead, it spread like poison through casual conversations, sideways glances, hushed exchanges that stopped when I approached. Derek was laying groundwork, creating a narrative where any future failures could be blamed on me. Even after my departure, former allies became distant, worried about association. The isolation was methodical and effective. I realized staying would destroy my reputation faster than leaving. Every day I remained gave Derek more opportunities to rewrite history, to position himself as the brilliant innovator held back by a difficult team member. My presence was being used against me. I resigned on a Tuesday morning, professionally and calmly. My letter thanked leadership for the opportunity, wished the team continued success, and made no accusations. Derek looked genuinely relieved when I delivered it. "I think this is best for everyone," he said, already moving on mentally. I spent my final 2 weeks documenting everything: email timestamps, version control logs, design iteration files, patent correspondence. I organized folders meticulously, labeled clearly, stored securely. If anyone ever cared to look, the evidence existed. My last day was quiet. A few genuine colleagues took me to lunch. Most people seemed uncomfortable, unsure what to say. The next morning, Derek sent a company-wide email announcing the upcoming DataStream launch. He described the technical architecture, the innovative approaches, the vision behind the design. His name appeared 11 times. Mine appeared 0. He'd won, or so he believed. My new position at Vertex Solutions was smaller in title but enormous in respect. During my first week, the CTO actually listened when I explained technical concepts. My ideas weren't dismissed or minimized. Nobody questioned my competence or suggested I was being too ambitious. The contrast was startling. I'd forgotten what it felt like to be valued for expertise rather than tolerated as an inconvenience. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without anxiety dreams about boardroom humiliations. Then, 3 weeks into my new role, a former Cascade colleague messaged me privately. "Things are falling apart here," she wrote. "Derek can't answer basic architecture questions. We've missed 2 deadlines already." Another developer reached out days later with similar concerns. The foundation Derek had stolen was cracking, and he lacked the knowledge to repair it. I didn't respond with satisfaction or advice. I simply acknowledged their messages and moved forward. The messages kept coming, each one painting a clearer picture. Derek had promised the board enhanced features he couldn't deliver. Simple bug fixes were taking weeks because nobody understood the underlying code logic. Junior developers were leaving, frustrated by inconsistent technical direction. A senior engineer I'd worked closely with called me directly. "He doesn't know what he's doing," Marcus said quietly. "Every explanation contradicts the previous one. The board is starting to notice." Apparently, client demonstrations were being postponed. Performance metrics were declining. Derek was deflecting blame, pointing to foundational issues and inherited technical debt. Code I'd written, suddenly convenient scapegoats. Marcus mentioned that the board had requested an external performance review of the entire engineering department. "They want to understand why results aren't matching Derek's projections," he explained. I thanked him for the information and said nothing about my own knowledge. Revenge wasn't my goal. Truth was simply emerging on its own timeline. At Vertex, I collaborated with an external consulting firm on an unrelated infrastructure audit. Morrison and Associates were thorough, ethical, and technically brilliant. Their lead auditor, Catherine Price, impressed me immediately with her detailed methodology and refusal to accept surface-level explanations. She asked probing questions, verified every claim, and maintained strict objectivity throughout the evaluation. I took mental notes, appreciating their professional approach. When the project concluded, Catherine mentioned they specialized in software development audits, intellectual property verification, and organizational integrity reviews. "We've helped several companies identify process gaps and accountability issues," she explained. I filed that information away without any specific plan. Meanwhile, Cascade Technologies announced a major expansion. Derek had convinced the board to invest millions in scaling DataStream, promising revolutionary market impact. Industry publications quoted him extensively. His LinkedIn profile now listed Chief Architect and Innovation Leader. The overreach was stunning. He'd tied his entire reputation to technology. He fundamentally didn't understand. Derek's promises grew more elaborate. He committed to features requiring expertise he didn't possess. Trade publications ran interviews where he described technical approaches that contradicted basic software principles. Engineers who understood the reality grew increasingly concerned, but Derek dismissed their warnings. "The board believes in this vision," he'd apparently told the team. "Execute it." Impossible deadlines were set. Developers worked overtime trying to deliver what Derek had promised, but the foundation, my stolen design, was being misapplied in ways that created cascading problems. Client complaints started appearing. Beta testers reported inconsistencies. Derek blamed the development team publicly while taking credit for anything that worked. Then investors began asking uncomfortable questions during quarterly calls. Why weren't projected benchmarks being met? Where were the promised capabilities? Derek's confident deflections started sounding hollow. Board members who'd once championed him now requested detailed technical documentation. His house of cards was swaying. A former Cascade colleague mentioned casually that the board was seeking recommendations for external auditors. They wanted an objective assessment of the engineering department's capabilities and processes. "Do you know any good firms?" he asked innocently. I thought about Catherine Price and Morrison and Associates. Their reputation was impeccable, their methodology rigorous. I mentioned them purely on merit, without disclosing my previous collaboration. "They're thorough and fair," I said simply. 2 weeks later, I learned through industry contacts that Cascade had hired Morrison and Associates for a comprehensive software development audit. The scope included authorship verification, process integrity, and intellectual property validation. My heart rate quickened reading that scope. I hadn't orchestrated this, hadn't pulled strings or manipulated outcomes. I'd simply answered a question honestly. But the timing felt like the universe correcting an imbalance. Derek had no idea what was coming. Marcus called again, voice tense. "Derek's panicking," he said. "He's pulling people into closed-door meetings, demanding we rewrite project timelines and alter documentation to match his version of events." Some team members complied, worried about job security. Others quietly refused, uncomfortable with falsifying records. One developer, Jamie Torres, kept meticulous original files. "I'm not changing my engineering logs," Jamie told Marcus. "That's fraud." Derek grew visibly agitated as the audit approached. He sent lengthy emails outlining correct narratives about the software's development. He coached team members on what to say if interviewed. His desperation was becoming obvious, but he still controlled enough authority to make people nervous. The audit team arrived on a Monday morning. Catherine Price led the orientation meeting, explaining their process with calm professionalism. They'd review design histories, version control systems, email archives, and early prototypes. Derek sat in that meeting trying to appear cooperative, but his jaw was clenched tight. The auditors worked methodically. They requested access to repositories I'd contributed to, early design documents, and patent databases. Derek initially tried directing their attention toward recent work, emphasizing team collaboration and collective achievement. Catherine politely insisted on chronological analysis. "We need to understand the foundation before evaluating current state," she explained. I heard through Marcus that Derek was spending hours trying to explain technical decisions he hadn't made. Simple questions about why certain algorithms were chosen or how specific problems were solved left him fumbling for answers. "He keeps saying he'll need to check with the team," Marcus reported. "But the auditors want answers from the supposed architect." Then Catherine's team discovered something in the archived emails, references to my patent, filed before I joined Cascade. One auditor flagged it during a review session. Derek apparently went pale when they asked about the original patent holder. "That was collaborative work," he'd stammered. "The auditors requested the patent documentation. My name appeared everywhere once they started looking properly. Email threads discussing my pre-employment patent. Version control logs showing my username on foundational code commits. Design documents with my digital signature and timestamps predating Derek's involvement. The auditors compiled evidence quietly, professionally, without drama. Catherine Price called me unexpectedly one Wednesday afternoon. "We're conducting an audit at Cascade Technologies," she said. "Your name has surfaced repeatedly in our investigation. Would you be willing to answer some questions?" My hands trembled slightly as I agreed to meet. This wasn't revenge I'd orchestrated. This was truth emerging through proper channels, professional investigation revealing facts that Derek had tried to bury. I prepared carefully for the interview, gathering my own documentation, patent certificates, original design files, dated correspondence. Everything organized, everything factual. Catherine had always valued precision. I would give her exactly that. The interview took place in a neutral conference room. Catherine and two colleagues listened as I explained the timeline calmly, without embellishment. I showed them my patent application, filed 18 months before joining Cascade. I walked through the technical specifications, explaining how DataStream's core architecture matched my documented innovations exactly. I provided email evidence of Derek's presentation, the subsequent HR meeting, the severance offer attempting to compromise my patent rights. Catherine asked clarifying questions, taking detailed notes. She never showed emotion or indicated which way her findings leaned. When I finished, she thanked me for my clarity and thoroughness. "This has been very helpful," she said simply. As I left, I felt strange. Not triumphant, not vengeful. Just quiet. I told the truth professionally, provided documentation, and stepped back. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. 3 days later, Catherine scheduled the final audit presentation. With the board. In the same boardroom where Derek had stolen my work. I received an unexpected email from Cascade's CEO, Dr. Howard Bennett. "Your insights during the audit process have been valuable," he wrote. "We'd appreciate your presence during the final presentation to address any technical questions that may arise." The invitation felt surreal. Returning to that boardroom, those same leather chairs, that same projection screen. I almost declined, tempted to let the audit speak for itself without my physical presence. But something made me accept. Perhaps I needed to witness this moment, not for revenge, but for closure. I arrived early, sitting in the back corner. Board members filtered in, making small talk. Derek entered last, looking confident in his tailored suit. He saw me and froze momentarily, confusion crossing his face, before recovering his composure. He probably assumed I was there in some support capacity, certainly not as a threat. Catherine began the presentation without preamble. The first slide appeared, Data Stream Software, Authorship Analysis. My name was listed prominently. Catherine methodically outlined discrepancies. Patent filing dates versus employment dates. Code commit timestamps showing my contributions predating Derek's involvement. Email evidence of Derek presenting work he didn't create. Design decisions he couldn't explain when questioned. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to concern to something harder. Derek interrupted twice, trying to reframe the narrative around team collaboration and collective innovation. Each time, Catherine calmly presented more documentation. Emails where Derek had explicitly taken sole credit. Presentations where my name was deliberately excluded. The severance offer attempting to compromise my patent rights. Then Catherine said something that made Derek's face drain of color. During our investigation, we consulted with the patent holder to verify technical details and timeline accuracy. She gestured toward me. Her cooperation was instrumental in establishing the factual record. The room went completely silent. Every board member turned to look at me. Derek stared, comprehension dawning slowly, horribly. He'd been so confident, so certain he'd erased me successfully. Dr. Bennett spoke first. Let me understand this clearly. The person Derek claimed credit for displacing is the same person who ensured this audit's integrity. Catherine nodded. Correct. Her documentation and technical expertise were essential to our investigation. Another board member, Patricia Valdez, looked directly at Derek. You presented proprietary work belonging to someone else as your own innovation. In this boardroom, Derek tried to respond, but his usual smooth deflections failed. Words tumbled out incoherently. Something about misunderstandings, team dynamics, collaborative environments. Nobody was buying it anymore. The evidence was too clear, too documented, too undeniable. Dr. Bennett's voice carried an edge I'd never heard before. You built your entire leadership position on stolen intellectual property. You made commitments based on technology you don't understand. You've exposed this company to potential legal liability. Derek looked around the room desperately, seeking allies. He found none. Even the executives who'd championed him looked disgusted. The person he'd tried to erase had become the foundation of his collapse. Dr. Bennett turned to me. Can you clarify your role in DataStream's creation and your current relationship with the patent? I spoke calmly, keeping my response brief and factual. I explained the patent filing timeline, my initial excitement about applying those innovations at Cascade, and the subsequent theft and erasure. I outlined Derek's presentation, the HR meeting discouraging me from challenging leadership, and the severance offer designed to compromise my legal rights. I claimed only what was mine, nothing more, nothing less. No embellishment, no dramatics, just truth. I left because staying in an environment that rewarded theft over integrity wasn't sustainable, I concluded. I participated in this audit because I believe in accurate documentation and professional accountability. The board members absorbed this quietly. Patricia Valdez asked if I had any current claims against the company. My patent stands independently, I replied. How Cascade proceeds with that knowledge is your decision. Dr. Bennett nodded slowly, then looked at Derek. Please step outside. We'll continue this discussion without you. The restructuring happened swiftly. Within a week, Derek's title was stripped. His authority dissolved. He was placed on administrative leave while legal reviewed potential contract violations. His direct reports were reassigned. The engineering department underwent comprehensive reorganization under new leadership that actually understood the technology. Cascade's legal team approached me about licensing arrangements for my patent. The negotiation was professional and fair. They acknowledged my ownership, compensated appropriately, and ensured proper attribution going forward. DataStream's marketing materials were updated to credit the core architecture accurately. My name appeared in technical documentation, patent citations, and public materials. The company issued a quiet internal communication about integrity in intellectual property claims. Derek's name was never mentioned explicitly, but everyone understood. Several executives who'd supported Derek's narrative without verification faced consequences too. The board had realized the cultural problems extended beyond one manager's theft. Marcus called to tell me morale was improving. People feel like honesty matters again, he said. News spread through industry networks with surprising speed. Derek Sullivan had resigned, effective immediately to pursue other opportunities. No public scandal, no dramatic exposé. Just absence where prominence had been. His LinkedIn profile went quiet. Conference speaking invitations were withdrawn. The thought leadership articles ceased. Derek had built his reputation entirely on stolen work, and when that foundation crumbled, nothing remained to support him. I didn't celebrate his fall. I felt mostly empty, perhaps relieved that truth had emerged but unsettled by how much damage had been done first. Several former colleagues reached out, apologizing for their silence during my erasure. Some explained they'd been afraid of Derek's influence. Others admitted they simply hadn't wanted to see what was happening. I appreciated their honesty without necessarily granting absolution. Complicity through silence had enabled Derek's theft. Then, unexpectedly, an email arrived from Derek himself. The subject line read simply, "I'm sorry." I stared at the email for several minutes before opening it. Derek's message was carefully worded, acknowledging mistakes in judgment, and failure to properly attribute collaborative contributions. He claimed he'd gotten caught up in corporate pressure to present strong leadership, and had lost sight of important principles. The apology never quite took full responsibility. It framed his theft as miscommunication rather than deliberate erasure, as unfortunate circumstance rather than calculated betrayal. He hoped I understood the complex dynamics that had led to the situation. I read it twice, then closed my laptop without responding. Derek wanted absolution or at least acknowledgement. He wanted to reshape the narrative one final time, recasting himself as a flawed human who'd made understandable errors rather than someone who'd systematically stolen another person's work and identity. I didn't owe him that comfort. My silence would be my final answer. Some actions don't deserve the closure of response. Several days later, Dr. Bennett called personally. Cascade was launching a new innovation initiative and wanted me to lead it, on my terms. I sat in my home office considering Dr. Bennett's offer. Part of me wanted to refuse on principle, to leave Cascade Technologies in my past where Derek's theft had occurred. But another part recognized that the company had corrected course when faced with truth, had held leadership accountable, and had restructured to prevent future abuses. I negotiated carefully. Title, compensation, and authority that matched my contributions. Legal guarantees protecting my intellectual property. Cultural commitments to attribution and integrity. Dr. Bennett agreed to everything. I accepted the role but maintained my apartment lease, unwilling to uproot completely until the new environment proved sustainable. As I reflected on the journey, from that humiliating boardroom moment to this unexpected resolution, I realized something important. I hadn't won by destroying Derek, though his career had certainly collapsed. I'd won by refusing to disappear, by documenting truth, by maintaining integrity when systems failed. Derek had stolen my work believing he could erase me completely. But intellectual property, properly documented and defended, can't be erased. Neither can competence or truth. The board had applauded him once, but they'd believed lies. Now they knew better. Justice hadn't required dramatic confrontation or public scandal. It had simply required patience, documentation, and professional integrity. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's refusing to let anyone make you invisible. I opened my laptop and began drafting responses to the Innovation Initiative team. My work, acknowledged, attributed, and valued, was finally ready to move forward. On my terms this time. Completely.